if you've got citrus trees, then you might have what we call woolly whitefly. And it's a pest, but it's an unusual pest. And we're going to learn today why we won't spray insecticides to control it. So how do you diagnose your plant's health? Well, if you're like most people, you're walking by and looking at the plant and you see that it's green and looking good, you probably think nothing's wrong. Now, there's other symptoms that might give you a clue that there's insect pests at work, things like chewed leaves, or that maybe there's something wrong with the irrigation because your leaves are wilted, or the other culprit, yellowing leaves, which could be a variety of different things, insects or even nutrient issues. But for every rule in the entomology world, the insect pest world, there is an exception. And you can be walking by a healthy looking tree like this and not realize there are pests there and they're at work. And one of those exceptions is woolly whitefly. So when you see symptoms like leaf chewing, yellowing leaves, or wilting, that's going to cause you to take a step further and see what the culprit is. And that's the first step in an effective pest management strategy. You have to ID who's doing the damage. And that's the thing about woolly whitefly is it's there and present. You may not notice it because it's not giving off very obvious symptoms. And that's where you have to come in and take a look a little deeper. So on these leaves here, whiteflies are living. They live on the undersides of leaves, and that's why when you walk by, you might not see them. But if you turn that leaf over, you'll start noticing white waxy buildup, and that's a clue that you've got woolly whitefly. So whiteflies are similar to other insects like aphids because they have needle-like mouthparts that they use to insert into the leaf tissue, and then they tap in to the vascular system to suck out sap, plant sap, that's called phloem. Now, as they're doing that, they're taking in way more than they can actually consume themselves. And so as they filter out what they need, they excrete the excess. And that excess is a sugary solution because it's the plant sap. It is referred to as honeydew. You may be familiar with honeydew and aphids produce a tremendous amount, and it spews everywhere, and it'll build up on leaf surfaces, and you'll see that it becomes a sticky layer on top of a leaf. Now that is a medium that is suitable for the growth of a naturally occurring fungus called sooty mold. And it's called sooty mold because it grows in that sticky syrup and becomes blackened. And it will blacken the leaf and it will cut down on photosynthesis. Without the ability to photosynthesize, then the plants become weaker. Now, the difference between woolly whitefly and these other insects that produce honeydew like aphids is that their honeydew gets caught in the curls of their waxy exudates. Now those waxy exudates are white and curly, that looks a lot like lamb's wool, and that's why it's referred to as woolly whitefly. So that honeydew that's now in the woolly waxy exudates, that is away from the body of the insect, but it's not building up on the leaf surface. So we don't have the telltale sign of the honeydew and sooty mold that we would use to help us find and diagnose other insects with those piercing sucking mouthparts that produce honeydew. Woolly whitefly, like other insects, go through growth stages, metamorphosis. It's not like what you remember from Eric Carle's book, The Very Hungry Caterpillar. There, it was an egg and a caterpillar and a pupa and an adult. 4 stages. With woolly whitefly, we have 3: egg, nymph, and adult. So the woolly whitefly nymphs are the ones that are producing this curly wax. and they use that as a covering over their bodies. And then with the wax and the honeydew that's building up in there, they have a protective barrier against predators, the ones that you're typically familiar with, like lady beetles. But there are two predators of woolly whitefly that aren't bothered by the wool or the honeydew, and they are microscopically small parasitic wasps that were introduced into California for the biological control of woolly whitefly. They are called Amidus spiniferus and Caly's nowaki, and they are no bigger than the head of a straight pin. Now these two parasitic wasps don't sting, and they're very tiny, and all they do is look for woolly whitefly, and they lay their eggs in the nymph, and then the wasp young feed on and kill that nymph. So with the actions of those parasitic wasps, we have biological control. They keep the woolly whitefly populations under control, and they never really achieve pest levels. Woolly whitefly can become a pest if you interrupt this interaction by spraying an insecticide. Maybe you didn't intend to target woolly whitefly, maybe it's for another pest, but what happens is those little parasitic wasps are very sensitive to insecticides, and they will die off, in which case, without their presence and laying eggs in woolly whitefly, more woolly whitefly nymphs will survive to adulthood, and the populations will grow and become a problem. So now the populations are increasing, there's more honeydew, and that becomes attractive to another little pest that we've got in our gardens, and that is the Argentine ant. It's a sugar-loving ant, and they feed on honeydew. And the problem with Argentine ants and honeydew is they get really protective, and they don't want anything bothering those resources and the insects that are making their precious honeydew, because the ants take that back to feed their young in the nest. With that extra ant activity, then it'll be really challenging for Amidus and Caly's to make a comeback, to start getting back in and laying eggs into those woolly whitefly nymphs. So they'll slow the recovery process down. So if you want to not have woolly whitefly be an issue, the first thing is to not spray insecticides. Then, if you do have to spray insecticides, and you have wiped out the Amidus and the Caly's parasitic wasps, you're going to have to focus on ant control. And ant control is going to mean using appropriate baits that you can purchase at a local hardware store, but you can also physically stop them from getting up into the canopy of the tree, because they're coming from the nest in the ground, by putting a band of tanglefoot around the trunk. And that stops them from getting past that sticky band of tanglefoot and up into the tree to harvest the honeydew. So a lot of times nature takes care of itself, and in the case of woolly whitefly, it was introduced from Mexico into California in the 1960s, and subsequently we went and found the things that keep it under control in Mexico, the parasitic wasps, Amidus spiniferus and Caly's nowaki, and they have been working ever since, keeping woolly whitefly under good control. The only time we ever see woolly whitefly becoming a problem is when we've done something to remove them from the system. So we need to just avoid disrupting that as much as we can.